All right, welcome in everyone to another deep dive with us. Today, we've got a case that's just made for this kind of deep dive. It's the Gregory Vilman case, and we're going to be talking about what happened back in 1984 in rural France, in a little village called La Pange, which is nestled in the Villan Valley. When you think about it, you think like peaceful and quiet little village, right? So
Oh.
this is the story of a 4-year-old boy, Gregory Vilman, who was found dead in the Villan River. And decades later, there's still no conviction.
It's one of those cases that just grips you right from the start.
Yeah.
Even after all these years and all this attention and multiple investigations, the question still remains, who killed Gregory? And it really makes you think about how sometimes justice can be so elusive, especially when you have this much mystery and you have this much media attention.
Yeah, and that's why we're here today. One of our listeners sent in a podcast episode about this case, and we're diving deep into it together. We're going to try to sift through all the players, unpack the events, and explore the mysteries that still linger all these years later.
Yeah, to really understand how complex this case is,
Yeah.
I think we have to start with the Villemin family. Jean-Marie, the father, was a foreman in a local factory. And Christine, the mother, well, she became a very central figure in all this. And of course, there's Gregory, the intimate victim at the heart of all of this. But there's another character that we have to mention, and that's the Crow.
The crow, not a literal bird, of course.
Hmm.
This is what they called the anonymous person who was sending all these letters
Yeah.
and making phone calls and just tormenting the Villiman family. And it wasn't just threats. It was like they knew the family secrets and were using this information to just inflict all this psychological pain even before Gregory's abduction.
Yeah, and these communications were bone-chilling. I mean, they were
Yeah.
they were beyond just general threats. They were very specific about the Villemins' lives, about past conflicts. So they were intentionally trying to just break them apart.
So October 16th, 1984, Gregory's out playing in his yard, vanishes. And then hours later, his body is found in the river, hands and feet bound, and the investigation immediately starts to focus on those closest to him.
Yeah, and initially they zeroed in on Bernard Laroche, a cousin of Jean-Marie. Now, their relationship was pretty strained, lots of tension there, jealousy,
Yeah.
financial disparities, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And also at the time, they thought handwriting analysis linked Laroche to the letters from the Crow.
And then there were also reports of Christine being seen at the post office around the time that one of the crow's letters was sent.
Right, and so Christine very quickly also became a person of interest. The investigators, they couldn't ignore those sightings. Plus, there was also this rope they found in the Villemin's cellar, similar to the rope that was used to bind Gregory. But the motives were unclear.
This case blew up. I mean, like a media frenzy. Headlines everywhere, cameras, the whole village is just surrounded. And public opinion just swaying back and forth with each new piece of information or rumor. Christine was dubbed the most hated woman in France.
Yeah, and this really shows you the power of media, especially in these types of cases, to shape the narrative and people's perceptions. And you can imagine the pressure that puts on investigators to come up with answers to relieve this family's grief.
And it all just exploded when Jean-Marie, overwhelmed with grief, convinced of Laroche's guilt, took things into his own hands and shot and killed Laroche.
And here's where the legal system comes in. Under French law, all the murder charges against Laroche, well, they were dropped when he died. So
Yeah.
even though there was all this suspicion surrounding him, he basically benefited from the presumption of innocence.
So you have a grieving father driven to this desperate act,
Mhm.
and legal system trying to grapple with what to do about it.
And then you have Christine, who was already a suspect. She was arrested and charged with Gregory's murder. She went through hunger strikes. Her public image was just deteriorating. And this legal battle went on for years.
And then comes this new judge, Maurice Simon. He was known for being very meticulous. He wanted to go back and re-examine everything and what he uncovered through the whole investigation into question.
Yeah, Judge Simon really changed the game. He looked at witness statements,
Yeah.
alibis, the evidence. He found problems with procedures and maybe even some evidence tampering.
One of the big things he looked at was Muriel Bowles' involvement. She was Bernard Laroche's sister-in-law. And initially, she gave a statement saying he was involved, but then she recanted it and said she had been coerced by the police.
Yeah, what's the truth there? Was she a witness? Did she participate, or was she just caught in the middle? Judge Simon seemed to think she knew more than she was saying.
And then there was this whole insulin theory. They found a vial of insulin near the crime scene. So maybe Gregory was drugged before he died. But then where did the insulin come from? How does Muriel fit into all of this?
Right? It raises the question of premeditation
Mm-hmm.
and planning. And then it circles back to Muriel and if she could have gotten insulin.
But before Judge Simon could really pursue these new leads, he had to step down from the case. Because of a confidentiality breach,
Oh, right. We mentioned that earlier.
years of work just derailed.
It's so frustrating.
Yeah.
One mistake can have such a huge impact.
Christine was eventually exonerated in 1993, but still, no one knows who the killer is. Then the years go by, and you have these new technologies like DNA testing.
And you'd think that would be the answer, right?
Right.
But even with all that, it just didn't get resolved.
And then the case takes another turn. Marcel and Jacqueline Jacob, Gregory's great uncle and his wife, they become prime suspects.
And that's a whole other layer, isn't it?
Right.
Because now it's back to the family. They were on the periphery before, but now a closer look. And there are possible motives and inconsistencies in their stories.
It's like every time you think you're getting close, something else pops up. So we've got the Jacobs, we've got alibis, we've got these mysterious letters. We're going to unravel all that in the next part of our deep dive.
As we go deeper into this, I think it's pretty clear how tangled up all these relationships are. Small village, big family, everyone's connected. And with each new suspect, it's like we're getting closer and closer to the family itself.
Yeah, that's a good point. So let's talk about the Jacobs. What made them stand out as suspects?
Well, a few things. First, their behavior after the murder, it was odd, even detached. You'd think they'd be more emotional, especially in a small town like that, where everyone knows each other.
Right, everyone's in everyone's business.
Exactly. And then their alibi. They said they were at work, but when they looked closer, people at that factory traded shifts all the time.
Yeah.
And there wasn't good record keeping. So maybe they could have snuck out.
So maybe not so airtight after all.
Right. And then there's this union meeting. Marcel had these handwritten minutes as proof he was there, but they were found years later. Why would you hold on to something like that?
Unless you knew you might need it.
Exactly. And then there's that letter he wrote to his sister Monique, saying he was innocent. Why be so defensive unless you felt like people were closing in?
And what about all those newspaper clippings they found?
Right in their basement.
Yeah.
Why keep a file like that unless you were really interested in the case? Maybe a little too interested.
And then the stylometry analysis.
Oh, yeah, that pointed to Jacqueline as maybe writing some of the Crow letters.
So a husband and wife team.
Possibly. I mean, think about it. The letters weren't just threats. They knew things about the family, arguments, secrets, like someone was watching them and enjoying their pain.
Okay, so let's try to put this together. We've got LaRoche, Christine, and the Jacobs. Who did it? Did one of them act alone, or was it more complicated?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I don't think there's a clear answer. So many conflicting stories, weird evidence. It's like a puzzle with some pieces missing.
What about Michel, Gregory's uncle?
Ah, yes, Michel. Well, some people thought he was jealous of his brother Jean-Marie. And maybe he was feeding information to the Crow, or even behind it all somehow.
And his alibi wasn't that great either, was it?
Not really. The timing of that call from the Crow didn't quite add up. And why send his younger brother to tell their parents? It's those little things that investigators notice.
And Monique, Gregory's grandmother.
No, she's an interesting one. Really protective of some family members. Like she knew something. Maybe she was the mastermind behind the Crow, or maybe she was just trying to protect her family, even if it meant hiding the truth. And she died in 2020, so we'll never know for sure what she knew.
It's frustrating, isn't it? Like you're almost there, and then another twist.
Definitely.
We can't forget about the media.
Oh, yeah. They weren't just reporting the news. They were influencing it.
Creating this whole atmosphere.
It was crazy. Reporters everywhere, cameras constantly on the family, headlines with all these
That
accusations.
must have been awful for Christine.
Oh, absolutely. She just lost her son. And then she's being called a murderer by the press. And everyone's watching her every move.
It's like they were the judge and jury.
Exactly. And it wasn't just her. It affected everyone. The investigators, the witnesses, the whole community. It made everyone suspicious of each other.
So they might have actually hurt the investigation by doing that.
It's possible. It's that balance between the public's right to know and making sure the investigation is done right, and that people's privacy is protected.
This case makes you think about people, doesn't it?
It does.
You know, you think about this small town and everything seems fine.
Right.
But underneath, there's all this jealousy, greed, people doing terrible things to protect themselves.
Yeah, and keeping secrets.
The Crow's letters are like a perfect example of that.
Right. They knew so much about the family, their weaknesses, their fears. It's like they were using those secrets as weapons.
So even if this mystery is solved, the damage is done.
That's true.
Gregory's gone, the trust is broken, and those suspicions will always be there.
And yet people are still so fascinated by this case. Maybe because it reminds us that these things can happen anywhere.
To anyone. We've covered a lot, haven't we? Met the suspects, talked about the investigation, tried to make sense of it all.
Yeah, it's been quite a deep dive.
But there's still more to explore, like the legal stuff and what this all means for society.
Right, think about the bigger picture.
So we'll get into all of that in the final part of our deep dive. Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive into this case, I think we can all agree it's not just about the murder itself.
Right, it goes way beyond that.
It's about how the stickman failed, how the media got involved, and how all these family ties just complicate everything.
Yeah, it's amazing how many layers there are to this story.
We've talked about the unanswered questions, but we have to talk about the real-world consequences too, for everyone involved.
Right, the legal stuff. Jean-Marie actually went to prison for killing LaRoche.
Right, and then later he and Christine got money from the courts.
Yeah, because they decided it was a miscarriage of justice.
And Muriel Boll and Marie-Angela Roche too.
Bernard's widow, right?
Yeah, they got settlements as well.
So even though we don't know who killed Gregory, the courts did say that the investigation was messed up.
Which I guess is some kind of accountability, right?
Right.
But it just shows you how imperfect the system can be.
Exactly.
The evidence was all over the place, experts couldn't agree, and then the media frenzy on top of it all.
It's like everyone involved became a victim in some way.
Losing a loved one being wrongly accused, or having the whole world watching you.
And the village of La Ponge itself, it really suffered too.
Right. All that attention suspicion.
People afraid to be the next target of the Crow.
It created this atmosphere of paranoia.
That lasted for years.
It's like they lost their sense of community.
And that's hard to come back from.
So we keep coming back to the media.
Yeah, it's hard not to.
They weren't just reporting the news, they were shaping it.
And not always for the better.
Right. Sometimes they were more interested in selling papers than getting the facts straight.
It's like they forgot about the people involved and how their words could hurt.
It's a tough balance, isn't it, between informing the public and protecting people.
Yeah, I think they tipped the scales a little too far in this case.
It's also about human nature. You see this small town and it seems so peaceful, but underneath there's all this darkness.
Yeah, jealousy, greed.
The need for revenge.
People doing awful things just to protect themselves.
And the power of secrets.
Oh, man, those letters. They knew everything about the family.
Like they were spying on them and
yeah.
using their secrets against them.
It's almost like a horror movie.
So even if they find out who did it, the scars are still there.
Yeah, that's true.
The loss, the broken trust, the suspicion.
I think that's why people are still so drawn to this case.
Even after all these years.
It's like a reminder that these things can happen to anyone.
Anywhere.
Even in the most ordinary places.
We've talked about a lot today, haven't we?
We have.
The suspects, the evidence, the media, the family.
It's been a real deep dive.
And it's sad, you know?
It is.
To think about little Gregory and what happened to him.
And his family. How they've had to live with this for so long.
And we still don't have all the answers. But maybe that's the point.
Maybe
it makes us think about justice and truth.
And the things we'll never know.
Well, that about wraps it up for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us, everyone. And until next time, keep searching for the truth, no matter how difficult it may be.